Welcome to Somali Nexus, the podcast where we dig deep into the roots, the stories, and the legacy of Somali people, both past and present. I'm your host, and today we're shining a light on something that doesn't get nearly enough attention: the Isaaq Sultanate, one of Northern Somalia's most fascinating historical kingdoms. So, picture this: the 1700s, long before colonial powers carved up the Horn of Africa. In the north, a powerful Somali kingdom was thriving. Known as the Isaaq Sultanate, this wasn't just a clan-based society. It was a full-blown sultanate, with leaders, trade networks, diplomacy, and a strong cultural backbone that helped shape the identity of the region for generations. From the port city of Berbera to the highlands of present-day Somaliland, the Isaaq Sultanate wasn't just surviving, it was leading. But how much do we really know about it? Who were the sultans? What made this kingdom unique? And why is it often left out when people talk about African empires and Somali sultanates? In this episode, we'll walk through the rise of the Isaaq Sultanate, how it was formed, what life was like under its rule, and how it interacted with other Somali clans, Arab merchants, and eventually the watchful eyes of European colonialists. We'll also touch on how their legacy still echoes today, not just in history books, but in the hearts and pride of many Somalis, especially in the north. Whether you're diving into Somali history for the first time, or you grew up hearing stories from your elders, this episode is for you. We're here to connect the past with the present, and maybe even help you see your own history in a new way. Join us today as we dive deeper into this fascinating chapter: the Isaaq Sultanate, Northern Somali Kingdom. You're listening to Somali Nexus. Let's begin.
Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. You know how much we love to explore different corners of history. And
Today's a good one.
we're diving deep into one that you suggested.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one.
This is the history of the Isaaq Sultanate.
Northern Somali Kingdom existed from 1750 to 1884.
That's a pretty good run.
It is.
You sent over some really interesting historical accounts,
Yeah,
and I think we can really pull out some cool insights into how this kingdom came to be, how it functioned, and what happened to it.
absolutely. And we'll be looking at these narratives that you've provided, detail its formation, how it was governed, and its interactions both with its neighbors and the kind of wider world.
Yeah, and to really get them, you have to picture the Horn of Africa after the decline of the Adal Sultanate. Big power in the region for centuries, but
For centuries, yeah.
it's kind of fragmented in the 1600s and then all these different,
These clan-based polities kind of rose up in its wake.
right. And the Isaaq Sultanate is one of those that emerges in that kind of environment geographically,
This is Somaliland today and parts of eastern Ethiopia.
right? And looking through these sources, it's interesting how the story of the Sultanate is woven from both oral traditions and then also, these written accounts.
Yeah, combination of sources, which is really interesting.
Yeah. And then the role of this kind of revered Arabian scholar in their origin story.
Very important.
This is fascinating.
Yeah. And just the dynamics of how these clans sort of jockey for position and the succession battles all make for a really compelling story.
It really makes you think, like, how did these clans manage to come together to form this unified kingdom? And how did it survive for over a century in this kind of environment?
How did it function?
Let's start at the very beginning. Okay. The roots, the origins. Our sources point to the Isaaq tribe, tracing its lineage back to Sheikh Isaaq Bin Ahmed from Arabia in the 12th or 13th century.
The 12th or 13th century, arriving in the Horn of Africa.
So that is really their connection back to that wider Islamic world.
Absolutely.
And he settled in Med, the coastal town, and through marriages with local women from the Deer clan, he had 8 sons.
And those sons then became the founders of the major Isaaq subclans.
So really, that's the diversification of that big group. And then by the 14th century, the sources say that these clans started to unify. What was driving that? Why did they come together?
Well, it looks like, I think probably the most important factor is just this need for protection.
Right?
They realize that there's safety in numbers in this politically fragmented region. You band together
Sure.
to protect your territory, your resources from external threats.
Yeah.
And also, maybe there was a sense of shared cultural practices developing to help bring them together. Maybe they were becoming more economically interdependent.
Right. It's interesting that even before the Sultanate was formally established, we have these figures associated with the Isaaq lineage popping up in other
Sources like the Fatah al-Habasha
the Fatah al-Habasha. This mentioned in the conquest of Abyssinia,
and Gurad Dawad from the Habar Mega Adel subclan.
and they were involved in the campaigns of Imam Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi.
In the 16th century.
Wow. So they're playing a role in these regional conflicts even before the Sultanate.
Yeah, definitely influential figures. So it's a longer history than just the Sultanate itself.
Now, before the Guled Dynasty, our sources talk about the Toljelo dynasty.
The descendants of Sheikh Isaaq's eldest son Ahmed, known as Toljelo.
So that's the origin of the name.
That's right.
And they ruled through 8 leaders. What can you tell us about them?
Well, it seems like this represents an earlier phase of centralized leadership among the Isaaq clans.
Okay.
It probably started as early as the 13th century, but eventually their authority weakened and they were overthrown. The last one, Bokor Harun, also known as Dubarar, was overthrown by a coalition of rival clans who wanted a change in leadership.
So what happened to the Toljelo dynasty after that?
Well, they kind of dispersed. A lot of them sought refuge with other Isaaq subclans, like the Habar Awal. And this upheaval makes sense, created a power vacuum, which set the stage for the Sultanate to emerge later.
Interesting. Now, we also see this change in titles from Garad to Bokor to Sultan. What does that tell us about the evolving nature of their leadership?
Yeah, so I think Garad probably meant something like a chieftain ruling over a smaller group of clans. Bokor, then, is more like a king with authority over a larger territory or more clans.
Okay.
And then Sultan suggests a connection to the wider Islamic world, a more extensive trade network, and broader influence.
Now, let's talk about the formation of the Guled Dynasty. And this is really the beginning of the Isaaq Sultanate.
Yeah, in the mid-18th century. And the pivotal event here is the Battle of Lafaruug.
Why was that battle so important?
Well, it was a decisive win for the Isaaq clans, led by Guled Abdi of the Idagale clan.
Okay.
They defeated the Absame tribes.
So this was a big military victory.
It was a huge victory, and it really cemented the Idagale clan's prominence.
Right.
And it showed everyone what a strong leader Guled Abdi was.
So naturally, the Isaaq elders wanted to make him sultan.
That's right.
But he declined. Why would he do that?
I know. It's kind of surprising. Maybe he thought he was too old, or maybe he just didn't want the responsibility.
Interesting.
But he did nominate his son, also named Guled, as his successor.
So we have a young Guled crowned sultan in 1750.
So in July 1750.
With his father as regent.
Yeah. Probably a wise move to ensure stability in those early years.
Yeah. And Sultan Guled ruled for a long time until 1808.
That's a good long reign.
Yeah. It must have allowed them to really establish themselves.
Yeah, to build up those governing structures, solidify their power.
But then, of course, the question of succession comes up.
Right. Always a tricky issue. He had 12 sons from 8 different mothers.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of potential claimants.
Talk about clan politics.
Yeah. And of course, it led to a dispute.
Yeah. The rightful heir was Roble Guled of the Ba'arala lineage.
Right.
But Dwale Afdag of Ba'anbaro faction, he had other plans.
It sounds like Dwale was a bit of a schemer.
He was ambitious, that's for sure. He saw an opportunity to advance his family's position.
So what did he do?
Well, he convinced Roble to raid some Ogaden herders to get livestock for his coronation.
Knowing full well that that would cause trouble.
Exactly.
And it did.
Oh yeah, it caused a huge controversy. People were outraged.
Makes sense.
And they disqualified Roble from becoming sultan.
So who was next in line?
Well, they offered the throne to Jama of the Bashaliban lineage.
Right.
But he declined too.
Really? Why?
I don't know. Maybe he just wasn't interested in ruling. But he did recommend Farah of Ba'anbaro.
Oh, so Dwale's brother. It sounds like Dwale was playing the long game here.
He might have been. And Farah was crowned sultan.
But not everyone was happy about it.
Right. Magan, who had supported Jama, he left in protest.
So the tensions were still simmering under the surface.
Definitely. These succession disputes always left lingering resentments.
So, what happened to Magan?
Well, he eventually attacked Duale, wounded him, and then sought refuge with the Isaaq subclan of the Habar Yonis.
Wow, this is getting complicated.
It's all about those clan loyalists, royalties, and personal vendettas.
Yeah. Now we have Sultan Farah marrying an Ogaden woman.
Interesting move.
And they had two sons, Hurray and Warfa, who became important leaders of the Ba Ogaden.
Yeah, these marital alliances were often strategic.
To build relationships with neighboring groups.
Exactly. A form of diplomacy.
But did it work? I mean, clearly Magan wasn't over his grudge.
No, not at all. And fate would have it that he ran into Sultan Farah with an Ogaden caravan near Berbera.
This doesn't sound good.
It wasn't. Magan saw his chance for revenge.
He took it.
He rallied the Isaaq Array warriors, even though some of them were hesitant to attack a sultan.
But Magan was persuasive.
Oh yeah, he played on their sense of injustice.
And they killed Sultan Farah.
Yeah, Dul Gadud, their leader. He delivered the fatal blow.
That's a dramatic end.
It really is. And it shows just how volatile things could get.
And Sultan Farah was buried near the Hamas well.
Which became a reminder of these power struggles.
Okay, so let's move away from those internal conflicts for a bit and talk about the Sultanate's economic power.
Yes, they had a lot of influence in the region.
Mainly because of their control over trade routes.
Especially the port of Berbera.
Berbera was a really important hub. Why was that?
It was the gateway between the Somali interior and the wider Islamic world. Caravans would come through Berbera, loaded with goods from all over.
What kind of goods are we talking about?
Well, from the interior, they brought things like livestock, hides, ghee, myrrh, frankincense. And those were traded for textiles, beads, dates, sugar, rice, all sorts of luxury items.
So Berbera was a bustling place?
Oh yeah, it was a real crossroads of cultures.
And the Sultanate benefited from all this trade through taxes, right?
Exactly. They collected customs duties on all the goods passing through their territory, especially at Hargeisa. Yeah, that was a key point along the trade route.
So they were able to use that revenue to maintain their authority.
Absolutely. And this economic importance attracted the attention of European powers and led to conflict, like the attack on the British ship Marianne in 1825.
That was a big turning point.
It was the Royal Navy blockaded the coast.
And then there was the Battle of Berbera in 1827, which the Sultanate lost, and they had to pay reparations.
15,000 Spanish dollars.
That must have hurt.
Yeah, it was a big financial blow.
So Sultan Farah tried to form an alliance with Sultan bin Saqqar al-Qasimi of Ras al-Khaimah.
In the Persian Gulf.
I guess he realized he needed help against the Europeans.
He did, but unfortunately for him, Sultan Saqqar couldn't provide the military support he needed. That's too bad. Now, the 19th century also saw the Sultanate facing internal challenges.
Yeah, there's a lot of infighting.
Like the Berbera Civil War in the 1840 SHS.
Between the Ayal Ahmed and Ayal Yunus subclans of the Habar Awal.
They were fighting over control of the port.
Of course, whoever controlled Berbera controlled the trade.
Sultan Hassan tried to intervene.
He used a sacred oath to try and stop the fighting.
It shows how important those traditional methods of conflict resolution still were.
They were, but sometimes they weren't enough.
And then there was the Habar Yonis, breaking away during Sultan Farah Guled's reign.
A major blow to the Sultanate.
They formed their own sultanate under Sultan Duriye Sugule, with their capital at Warren. Why did they secede?
Well, they'd become very wealthy, controlling some key trade routes.
Okay.
And they chiefed under the authority of the Sultan.
So essentially, the sultanates was splitting apart. It was. And by 1848, a British officer, C.P. Rigby, observed that there were two separate Isaaq capitals.
Wow. And even within the Idagale clan itself, there were clashes.
Yeah, like the feud between Hussein Hassan of the rare Guled and Hirsi Absiye of rare Abdi Bari.
Sultan Daria of the Habaryonis even tried to mediate.
That one through a traditional assembly.
That's interesting. So they were still trying to maintain some kind of unity.
They were, but the tensions were hard to overcome.
Then Egypt came onto the scene in 1870, occupying Hargeisa, Berbera, and other coastal towns.
It was a new challenge for the Sultanate.
What was the impact of the Egyptians?
Initially, they actually revitalized the economy of Berbera.
Really?
They modernized the port facilities. They encouraged Islamic learning.
So it wasn't all bad at first.
No, but things went downhill pretty quickly.
What happened?
Well, an Egyptian officer killed a Somali man, and that sparked a rebellion.
I can imagine.
The Habar Awal retaliated by killing the Egyptian governor of Berbera.
Wow. So the occupation was doomed.
It was, and the British were putting pressure on the Egyptians to withdraw anyway.
Because they had their own interests in the region.
Exactly. The British were concerned about instability, the modest threat, and the slave trade.
So the Egyptians left in 1884.
And the British stepped in.
And by that point, the Isaaq Sultanate had shrunk considerably.
Primarily to the Idagale and Isaaq subclans.
It was the beginning of the end for the independent sultanate.
It was. The British started signing treaties with coastal clans, establishing their protectorate.
But there was still resistance.
Oh, yes. Sultan Derye Hassan in Hargeisa was in contact with Muhammad Abdullah Hassan, the leader of the Darwish movement.
Who were fighting against the Europeans.
That's right, and they actually launched an uprising in 1900.
But it failed.
It did, but it shows that the spirit of resistance was still strong.
And the legacy of the Isaaq Sultanate lives on in Somaliland.
Absolutely. It's a source of pride and inspiration.
Its traditions of self-governance, its resistance against external powers.
Yeah. And the memory of its economic power.
It all feeds into the identity of modern Somaliland.
Exactly. And it's especially important because Somaliland declared independence in 1991.
Right.
And they see themselves as continuing the legacy of the Sultanate.
Even the Guurti Council, which was a key part of the Sultanate's government, still exists in Somaliland today.
It's a direct link to that historical tradition.
Amazing. So wrap things up, we've seen how the Isaaq Sultanate rose from the unification of clans, went through periods of prosperity and conflict, had this crucial economic role, faced external pressures, and ultimately left behind a powerful legacy. So what is it?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating story of a kingdom that's not as well known as it should be.
What were some of the most interesting things you learned?
I was fascinated by the combination of Arabian and Somali influences in their origins, how those succession battles played out, and their attempts to resist European colonialism.
It really makes you think about how those historical events shape the Horn of Africa today.
Exactly. How do we understand the region's complexities through the lens of those past power structures?
That's a great question to ponder. So if there's one thing to take away from this conversation, it's this. The Isaaq Sultanate wasn't just a relic of the past. It's a story of identity, strategy, and resistance. And it's one we need to keep telling.
That's why we're here. That's Somali Nexus, where past and present meet, and where history lives on through conversation.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Isaaq Sultanate. If you liked this episode, make sure to follow, subscribe, and share the story.
It was my pleasure. Until then, stay curious, stay connected.
See y'all in the next deep dive.